are members of Toastmasters? And how many of you are not? Excellent. Okay, we have information for all of you. It'll work for you. And we have 3 who are not members of Toastmasters. How many of you have never given a speech ever? And so 3 of you have given a speech sometime. And the rest of you, would you say that you're spending too much time writing your speeches? I knew your hand was going up. I just knew it. How many of you are spending, or you're staying up past midnight preparing a speech for your club?
How many days or weeks in a row?
And how many of you are in clubs where you know of people who have left Toastmasters but because they said it took too much
Time.
Time and effort. Yeah.
Exactly. Can we call that time pain? Would it be okay if we call that time pain? We'll just put a label on it, pain. Well, tonight, in 45 minutes or so, or an hour, we are going to aim to remove that pain for you and liberate you from yourself so that you are free to prepare simple speeches that are good. I use that word for a reason, because the aim in the Toastmasters room is not to give perfect speeches. It is not to give life-changing speeches, although that might happen. The aim in the Toastmasters room is to prepare us to go outside of the Toastmasters room where we can change lives and make dreams happen. It isn't necessarily in here, and I will continue to harp on that as we go along. Because some of you, I know, are caught in perfectionism and some subconscious or conscious need to have to get it right, to have to get it perfect, and that is not at all why we are here. So we'll have a lot of letting go of that expectation tonight. Is that good? Alrighty. We'll spend around 15 minutes or so teaching the method, because that's all it takes. I'll try to stretch it into 15. And usually telling a story or something, we'll stretch it out. It actually takes less time. It's about an extra large coffee for me. And then we'll walk through a speech. We'll have a break, and then in the second half, we'll come back. We will work with someone to prepare a 5 to 7 minute speech, and that person will give the speech right here and there. Will that be cool? So we know the maximum amount of time it takes is 60 minutes. You doing it alone will take a lot less than 60 minutes. We'll do some mathematics, and you'll see how that works. Is that, hey, my man.
I'm here for you.
High 10. All right. Crazy boy. Alrighty. How many of you, when you're starting a speech, the very first thing you do is start drafting? Thrashing at the keyboard. I knew it. Whenever I ask these questions, I'm going to look at you first, because I know where you're at.
And you only know me from my being grammarian.
Thrashing at the keyboard, and after a while, you get lost in the words, and you have no idea where it's going or how to assemble this thing into a 5 to 7 minute speech, and you have too much information because you can't possibly say it all. So people are in that? Okay, we are going to fix that tonight. Is that exciting? That's exciting. When you are about to prepare a speech, what's the very, very, very first thing we need to do? The first thing we need to do, the very first step.
Time ourselves? No.
I'm sorry?
The message.
Yes. The very first thing we need to do is to not thrash at the keyboard at all. Now I'm going to take the word message and I'm going to convert it into another word that some of you know, and some of you might be working on longer versions of this, and that is the word thesis. You have a handout in front of you. Feel free to take notes as we go. Step 1 is to identify the thesis. How many of you are going to university right now? You have a longer version of thesis than I'm going to give this evening. In a speech, the thesis is the one sentence only, that you want the audience to take away as the action, the feeling, the knowledge for them. It is the premise, if that word works better for you. If the word message works for you, use the word message. Perhaps core message, key message, one sentence only. If you can cut it down to a couple of words, that'll save you some time, because one sentence is quite long. What's the difference in these two sentences? Tonight, I will speak about the importance of using chairs versus using chairs is important. The second one, we made a statement. The first one, it's sort of wishy-washy. For tonight, I'll speak to you about pets. That's not a thesis, that's not a premise. We have no idea what's going to happen. If I say pets are wonderful, or if I said pets are bad, you'd have a clear understanding of where I'm going with that. The second one, when I make a statement, a premise, a thesis, that's what we're after. Not speaking about, because about can't be done in 5 to 7 minutes. About can't even be done in a weekend. It can't, there's too much. You need to focus down, make a statement. The statement, the one idea you want the audience to leave the room with and do. How long does it take you to write a sentence?
So long the sentence is.
So let's say 1 minute.
Okay. I'm known for my run-on sentences. When I'm writing.
Single clause. How I focus you now?
Yes.
One clause only.
Okay.
No, I have to have a run-on sentence. One clause only, take a minute tops. What happens if you have other ideas that come to mind? That's like the monkey on the brain, right? Chattering on your shoulder saying you have to tell them, you have to do this, you have to do that. You don't. In the Toastmasters room, it's not about giving the right speech, it's about communicating, learning how to speak. The other ideas, if it helps you, if you're on a computer, have a file, call it speech, next word? Ideas. If you're going along and that monkey is nattering at your brain, and you have great speech ideas, say, thank you, monkey, and put it over in the speech ideas file so that your mind remains quiet and focused. So we can't take time away from the speech, it's cluttered. Is that helpful? Park it away. Do not allow those ideas to come in. Now, as you're going along, if stories come to mind, go over there and put them in, write them in, park them, get them away from your conscious mind. Just get them out of sight. Thesis. One sentence only tops. 1 minute. Next step, some of you have different processes for this, so we'll start with one way of doing it. How many of you ever heard of brainstorming? Brainstorming, just thinking with an open mind quickly about the ideas that amplify your thesis. Not in full sentences, but 1, 2, maybe 3 word bullets only, tops. If it's a particular story, just the name of the story, not the story. Just identify it without writing it. Do not start drafting. Stop yourself. Take, to build the collection of ideas, take 2 minutes. Tops, 2 minutes. And I call this step headings. You could call it points, headings, points at step 2, whatever word works for you to just identify stories or research that you're going to present. Do no research at this point. Then, step 3 is details. So for each heading, there's a heading there, there's a heading there, there's a heading there, there's a heading there. And in the handout, there's a sample speech. We'll look at how it would look if you're using Microsoft Word. Details filled in for each story. How many of you ever heard of information mapping? Thank you. Information mapping, there's an idea in there. Information mapping, very quickly, is the structure and queuing of information for us humans, how we process information as humans. And the idea here is chunking, that by working on one chunk only, it'll keep that monkey brain from having you scattered. If any ideas come to mind, you can park them. Okay? There is a sub-step that I missed on the headings section. Now this takes another 30 seconds or so, and that is to sequence your headings in an order that works for you. In your handout, there is a speech preparation worksheet. There's a section in there called headings. It'll be inside of a box. There it is right there, inside of a box. There's a bunch of sequences that you can use, and these are all the sequences that I've come up with for headings. Often the icebreaker speech is done in chronological order. Fine. Sequential, first, second, third, sort of like chronological. A proposal, if you're giving a sales presentation, present the problem first. What did this workshop open with? The problem, your pain, the time, right? That was on purpose, because I want to get you into, I want to hear this. Geographical, categorical, I want to talk about sales, delivery, finance, compare and contrast, problem, solution, and so on. Take 30 seconds to sequence your headings. On to step 3, which is the details. How long did the details take to write? This is almost a trick question. In Toastmasters, speak about subjects you already know. Speak about subjects you already know, unless you absolutely enjoy research and are okay with investing the time in research. It's my considered opinion that the pain of research will get in the way of you learning how to communicate, which is not to put down the value of research. It's valuable. It needs to be done, but not necessarily for speaking in Toastmasters where we're learning how to speak. So if you already know the story, how much time should you spend on the details? If we, does anyone have a topic that they're working on? Einmar, do you have a topic? Do you?
But I can't thesis it.
It's okay.
Looking into the option of moving a Toastmaster club.
Moving a Toastmaster club, and have you ever done this, or do you have any ideas about it?
Yes.
You do have ideas about it? And let me ask you this question. If you and I went to a coffee house by any name, and we sat there over a coffee, could you possibly tell me your ideas about moving a Toastmasters club? Or would you have to say, thank you for coming, just wait a moment, I'll take some notes, and then I'll be able to talk about it?
I would just get.
You would just gab. You could describe it. You wouldn't need to write it down. Or if you did write it down, you could take a moment and make a few bullets. Would you say, just to guide you through each piece? Yes or no? Do you need to write every word? So you could cut it down to a few bullets. If you already know the subject matter and for some reason you're in a state currently where you're still tied to paper, having to hold on, then hold on and reduce your script to bullets under each heading as a visual cue for the next thing for you to talk about if your nervousness is getting in the way still. So you'll be able to, oh, check in, okay, I'll talk about that now.
Can I just ask a question on
Yeah.
that point though?
Yeah.
Is it always nervousness, or do people fall in love with their words so much that they can't get away from
It's
writing it down and then saying it word for word?
whatever dysfunction you have that causes you to be anchored to your script on a level of holiness. That you can't do anything but this script because it is perfect. Whatever that is for you, then I suggest removing that by cutting it down to notes. And if your heading is enough, then just work with that. Get up and give your speech and see what shows up. Just like going to the coffee house, my belief is what shows up will be perfect. And every time you give the speech, it will be perfect and different. It's up to you to trust your creativity, your intelligence to deliver on demand. With practice, and not much practice, and going for a coffee, you will get there. I haven't yet met a person who couldn't do this. I've done this with table topics. For example, if someone's up answering a table topic, anyone not know what table topics is?
No, what's it, what is it?
Don't know? Table topics is the Toastmasters exercise in speaking impromptu, speaking off the cuff. We ask a question, the person gets up, speaks for two minutes. I've had people be completely frozen. And I've left them there and I just ask them an open question like, can you continue to tell us about, and 100% of the time they've been able to continue and finish speaking. They just needed to be able to trust in themselves. Is that exciting? Ah. So we have our headings, we have our details, which are very short. And if you want to spend time drafting a speech, well fine. Enjoy yourself. If I'm in the speech contest, I will script a speech. I gave a humorous speech, one or two people heard it, the much ado about nothing speech. Its wording was so careful that it demanded full script. I generally never do that, other than in those cases for the speech contest. If I'm just going out to give a presentation, I do not script. I speak from my knowledge. Well, I hope. Anyway, you can call it knowledge, or I think it is anyway. Where are we? Okay. So we have our details there. Now, how many of you might be wondering about the conclusion? And maybe you've heard people say, begin with the end in mind. Or they'll say, begin with the conclusion in mind, because
You gotta end up.
because that's what the audience hears last. So begin there. And I go, well, it's partly true and it's partly untrue, because I've heard conclusions that didn't match the speech. And I've heard openings that were brilliant, just for a different speech. So they're partly right, and you'll see why in a couple of minutes. Step 4 is the opening. And what does your handout say? Does it say opening, or does it say anything? Okay, good. Fill in with opening and conclusion. Here's where you want to take some notes. How many of you have ever heard a speech open like this? Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guests. Okay. How many of you, when you heard that opening line, went, that was magic? I am so glued to this speaker right away, I'm in. Or how many of you heard speeches that did not open with that line, and you were left wondering, didn't say fellow Toastmasters, not sure if I'm supposed to listen at this point. No. All right, I'll listen anyway, since I'm not doing anything else right now. Were you ever confused as a member of the audience about your role? No. So why do we do that?
Tradition.
Tradition. Why do we do that? Or it's not interesting, it's dull. There's no cue there, you don't need to know who you are. You understand that you're a member of the audience, and generally you will continue listening, and hopefully you're not done before the speaker is, and all that good stuff. How about this? A statement or question that arouses audience interest in the speaker and the speech. A statement, question that arouses the audience interest in the speaker or the speech. It can be enrolling questions. Tonight, what question did I ask you? Some of them. How many of you are already? Are already?
Members?
Yes, members of Toastmasters.
Yeah.
Of course, we want to include everyone. So how many of you are not members of Toastmasters now? You're all in. An arousing statement. For example, I gave a speech one time which was went something like this. September 11, 2001, almost 3,000 people died at the World Trade Center, and a war ensued. Every year in the United States, 36,000 people die on the streets, and no one does anything. 36,000 people in the United States die in motor vehicle collisions every year. Now that speech went on to talk about driver safety. But when I did that opening sentence, were you in or were you in? You remember where you were on that date, even though that date had nothing to do with my speech. I anchored my speech in your emotional state 13 years ago. So some arousing statement that gets people interested.
Great. I think in Toastmaster, that speech is great, but like, usually there's a protocol where you say, Mr. Chair or Madam Chair or something. Even though you start with this captivating introduction,
Yeah.
I think there's one liner where you have to sort of put it in.
Yeah, so they have that, so that people get the magic moment, right?
If you look at all these contestants, they have this one line that you have to include it.
You know why they do that?
Tradition.
No.
Obey.
To answer that question, why the speech contestants do that is because they believe judges will mark them if they don't, and that belief is reinforced by judges who mark them when they
Right.
don't.
But outside of Toastmaster, you don't have to do this stuff. I agree with you.
Oh, it sounds ridiculous.
Yes.
Some organizations will have one word that applies, that's protocol. Protocol, yes, calls for it, and they could have customs that you want to follow, connect with your meeting or organizer and ask them that question. Absolutely. Here's where you put it. So we have our opening line, couple lines. Depending on the length of your presentation, that could be a story. Here's where you put it. The next part of the opening is the thesis. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, all welcome guests.
Most of them, yes.
I believe that driver safety is paramount, whatever I'm going to say. Driver safety is paramount. The next sentence is my thesis statement. Put it there. Good or good?
Good.
All right, man. The third part of the opening. Have you ever heard the statement, tell them what you're going to tell them?
Yes.
Tell them.
Tell them. Tell them what you told them. That's an indication to put a map sentence or two to indicate the structure of the presentation. You'll see that in the sample, which doesn't necessarily have to be two things in my life reminded me of the importance of it. The thing one was this, the thing two was that. It doesn't have to be that trite, but in training you might want to make it that trite. Tonight I did an opening. In the opening I said we will do some teaching, we'll walk through a sample speech, we'll have a break, and then at the end we'll prepare and give a 5 to 7 minute speech. That was my map. We're doing training, so I made it trite. Alrighty, where are we? Does anyone know where I am? Oh yeah, the opening, the opening. A map sentence indicating the structure of the speech. We'll see it in the sample speech. We're going to move on into the conclusion, because it's all based on the thesis. The first part of the conclusion is give the map again. The second part of the conclusion is the thesis. So that if the person in the audience fell asleep and they woke up at that moment, they would get the point of your speech. They would be completely fulfilled except the emotions and so on. Finally, in the speech, give a call to action, to think, to feel, because you know your speech. You want the audience to leave that room and do something differently, to think differently, to feel differently. Give them a call to action at the end, which could be to think or to feel, to do something. It could be to donate at the door. It could be to meet us afterwards for post-toasties. It could some call that, whatever it is, a call to action for them to act. Maybe it was to buy a product. Meet me at the back, we'll get some product on, whatever. That is the method, the 5 steps, once again. How many of you are counting? You're counting, right? Yeah, we're at 4, good. The 5th step is to give it a title. This is a trick. Give it a title that is simple without giving it all away. Catchy title. I did a speech one time called Perfect Imperfection. Another one was Much Ado About Nothing, borrowing a line from William Shakespeare. Some of you have heard of him, right?
Yeah.
Trying to, leverage popularity, right? If I'm nobody, why not connect with somebody? Works. A title, or you can make a title so ridiculously long that it's humorous. I heard a contest speech one time, and the title was about a paragraph. What was funny is the contest chair had to say it twice. It's quite hilarious. But in general, two words, 3 words, 1 word, it's all good. The 5 steps, once again, are identify the thesis. 2, headings. 3, details. 4,
Opening and conclusion.
5, which happens in no particular order. Give it a title. In your handout, you have a sample speech. Let's turn to it now. Are there any questions while we're doing that? Did I leave out anything? Or good?
Sorry, just a quick
Yeah.
question. So in your humorous speech, you didn't have a call to action, or did you?
In the case of a humorous speech that has absolutely no value whatsoever, not really, but as it turns out, it actually did, in a really contrarian, bizarre way that I don't have the time to explain right now, but I could later if you like. We're not going to go through it now, but there's one criteria in the humorous speech contest that says, even though it's a humorous presentation, the speech should be of value. So I did give them some value in a twisted sort of way. Yeah. All right, sample speech called Step Over the Pebbles.
I did have a question.
Yeah.
Any merit or importance in identifying the audience we're addressing? Because you intimated, we want to arouse their interest or maintain the interest, so we have to know to whom we're talking. We have to be able to size them, some. So does that play a role here?
To be able to understand their current state, you mean? Is that what you mean?
A level of knowledge or interest into the subject matter that we are about to address.
Okay. And you can do it with your meeting planner. So if you're speaking at some group and you ask them what's the range of the group, what knowledge do they have, so you already know that. You can do as I did, ask enrolling questions, who's never going to give a speech, who's given some speeches, who's working too much on their speech, so we can get some idea. So you can ask the audience, absolutely.
The way you just did with us.
Yeah. Depends on the speech. In my much ado about nothing speech that had much ado about nothing, there was no value to understanding anything.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Walking through our sample speech, we have an opening. The title is repeated throughout the speech in different ways, so it forms sort of an anchor. It forms an anchor if I repeat that title throughout. This structure combined categories, school and mother, with chronological order in that the story about school happened before the story about my mother. It's just how it turned out. It needed to be in that sequence. Now, how many of you are counting and notice that there's only 2 headings and not 3? 2 headings for school and mother and not 3. And how many of you rule-bound people are wondering why aren't there 3 headings? Because you're supposed to have 3 headings. No, you don't. You must follow the rule of 3s because it's a rule. And if you don't follow it, then you're breaking the rule. We don't want to break rules. Well, it's not a rule, so done. First sentence, it's easy to trip over a pebble, but difficult to trip over a mountain. Those words spoken by our past District 61 Governor Jack Gammon made me think of how easily we allow problems to trip us along the path to achieving a greater goal. The first time I gave that speech, nobody knew me at all, but everybody knew Jack Gammon. And Jack, as it turns out, he actually said that sentence at a previous conference. I listened to the speech idea. And as it turns out, by saying that he said it, which I'm bound to do by the rules in the contest anyway, I'm anchoring me in everyone's love for Jack Gammon. He's a sweet, funny person. And sentence 1, I'm in with the audience. Thesis, dear friends. All right, that's another way of saying fellow Toastmasters. Dear friends, when we allow problems to stop us instead of focusing on the greater goal, then we trip over pebbles as we lose sight of the mountain. That's an antithesis. It's a backwards way of saying, and in other words, later on, you know I'm going to say step over the mountains. Step over the pebbles. Here's the map. I tripped over a pebble in school and later learned to step over pebbles as I cope with losing a close family member. School, close family member. The very next sentence is going to be, I always enjoyed school and I loved math. And on the stage, I'll probably walk over and do something like this. I shift in the voice, I shift my place on stage, and people know I'm going to talk about school. I'll do my school story. Then, at the bottom of the page, I showed them how I could trip over the pebble of honors math instead of climbing the mountain of learning. It's a tie-in to the thesis. Very next sentence, transition. Years later, time transition, I faced what seemed like another mountain in my life. A change in subject, a change in category. 2 cues that I'm moving to the next story without saying I'm moving to the next story. The second thing in my life that reminded me was, then I go and tell the story about Mom. She passed away from cancer. And there was a tie-in to the thesis in the last paragraph. I could have blamed doctors, blamed life, blamed anybody, but this time I chose not to, as I realized bitterness would not bring her back. There's a contrast from my behavior in the first story to the second story, on down into the conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, through school and my mother's passing, I learned that life is not always fair. Map sentence. People better know that I'm in the conclusion. Now, how many of you rule-bound people are wondering why I don't say in conclusion? No one's wondering? Okay, we'll just leave it there. By now, you're not wondering, right? If I hear someone say in conclusion or in summary, and the audience responds with a sigh, I leave it out. In the conclusion, we should hear nothing new. The thesis, in this one life of ours, it's not whether we experience disappointments, but how we respond to them. In other words, step over the pebbles, how we respond to them that makes the difference. Very last paragraph, call to action. Take a close look at your life. Have you lost sight of your mountaintop for the sake of a few pebbles? Do resentment or bitterness hold you back? And if they do, decide right now to step over those pebbles. Stay focused on your mountaintop until you can look over and see your promised land. So that very last bit, I shifted from me, narcissistic focus, to audience, you. In the advanced speech training, we bring in the audience throughout the entire speech, but for the first speech training, to get a good speech, we'll say the story's about you, and that's fine. Okay? Any questions on that summary? Is it clear, as we went through, the structure, how it plays out in conversion from conceptual structure into a linear presentation in the speech? Because speeches always begin in the opening. They always have a body in the middle, even if it doesn't seem like it does, and they always conclude. People have different structures, but when presenting it, there's only one structure, start to finish. We'll have a break, and we'll come back afterwards. We'll have a 5 to 7 minute speech. We'll work through preparing one, and we'll hear a 5 to 7 minute speech. Cool or cool? There's food at the back, and is there any other information we need to pass on?
How long is the break? No, thank you. The break is going to be 15 minutes.
Okay.
I will let you know when we have 5 minutes. Thank you.